Helen, do you want to? Thank you. Hi everyone, so my name is Dr. Sarah Nelms and I'm a lecturer at the University of Exeter's Centre for Ecology and Conservation, which is based on the Penryn campus in Cornwall. I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Zara Bottrell and Helen Chadwick, also from the University of Exeter. And we're delighted to be hosting today's Southwest Marine Ecosystems webinar on plastic pollution. It's the first webinar in a series that will be running across March, so please have a look at the Southwest Marine Ecosystems Facebook and Twitter accounts for more information about the other sessions that are running. Today we've got a brilliant lineup of excellent speakers who will be discussing a range of topics relating to plastic pollution. First up, we have Emily Stevenson, who is a PhD student at Exeter and Plymouth Marine Lab, and she'll be talking about how microplastics can be vectors for microbial resistance, antimicrobial resistance. She'll be followed by Rachel Yates, who runs the Plastic Free Communities Initiative at Surfers Against Sewage, and she'll be talking about community grassroots action on upstream solutions. And to finish off, we have Sue Sayer, MBE, from the Cornwall Seal Group Research Trust, and she'll be running through how entanglement in plastic pollution can impact seals and birds, as well as other species. So during the webinar, please keep your microphones muted, and you may have noticed that your cameras are also switched off. This is because the session today is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. There'll be opportunities to ask questions to each of our speakers today after each talk. So please pop your questions in the chat box if you'd like us to read out your question for you, or use the raised hand emoji to notify us that you'd like to ask your question in person. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Emily.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah. I'll just share my screen. Can you see this okay? Fantastic, I've got a thumbs up. Okay, so hi everybody. As Sarah said, my name is Emily Stevenson, and today I'm going to talk to you about my PhD research, which looks at the role of microplastics as vectors for antimicrobial resistance in aquatic systems. But that's a bit of a mouthful, and for people who aren't really aware of this research topic, it maybe doesn't make quite enough sense at the moment. So I've decided to actually call my presentation something a bit more glamorous or exciting, and that's microbial reefs on marine microplastics. But before I delve into my research, I'm just going to introduce myself. So it's really nice to be able to come to one of these events and talk about my research, because sometimes when I go to plastic events, you may have heard me talk about my charity, Beach Guardian. So this was co-founded in 2017, and it's essentially an organisation that aims to tackle plastic waste by empowering communities. But as well as working for Beach Guardian, of course, I'm doing my PhD research, but I try to, and I'm very fortunate to be able to kind of wear a few different hats within my roles and try to be as interdisciplinary as possible. So I'm also kind of dabbling in the world of policy, being an intern with the House of Lords at the moment, in science communication. So I'm a previous series presenter with BBC Spotlight. We hosted a series in 2019 exploring plastic pollution in the Southwest. And then also working collaboratively with lots of other organisations, so Ocean Generation, Marine Life, Keep Britain Tidy and the Shark Trust, for example. But as I said, today I'm going to really focus on my research. So my PhD is co-supervised by the University of Exeter and Plymouth Marine Laboratory. And there are a few different things that we hope to kind of address and look at with this research. But before I kind of go into those a bit more in detail, I'd like to kind of set the scene, give a bit of background, an overview of the key areas of my research. So what are microplastics? What is bacteria? What is antimicrobial resistance? And then how do these things all interplay together? So first of all, microplastics. Now, this is probably a bit of a buzzword that many of you have heard many times before, but for those of you who don't really know what these are essentially any microplastic, any plastic less than 5 millimeters in size. And though they're small in size, they are certainly not small in number. Microplastics accumulating in the environment are in vast quantities. So this picture you see on the right-hand side of the screen here, this was taken on a Cornish beach. This was Watergate Bay. And you can see along this strand line here, it's absolutely just littered in these tiny plastic particles. And I think because microplastics are so small, they're very commonly underestimated as a threat. Or because they're small, it's kind of this out of sight, out of mind kind of approach. I think sometimes the way that plastic pollution can be communicated sometimes looks over microplastic pollution. So one example of this is, I'm sure many of you saw the fantastic documentary Seaspiracy. And this was really great at communicating one real threat of plastic fishing gear in the ocean. But I think it did brush over microplastics. So for example, this film would keep quoting that 46% of plastic in the ocean was fishing related. Therefore, fishing related plastic makes up a large proportion of the problem, which is true, but they were cherry picking this fact from one study that looked at plastic waste in the North Pacific garbage patch, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And what this study did was it quantified by mass the plastic that was floating on top of this one area of the ocean. So 46% of that plastic floating in that area by mass was fishing gear. But when they look at by number, 94% of the plastic present in this area were microplastics. So this is making up a real significant proportion of the plastic here. So it just needs to be highlighted that when we're talking about plastic waste, microplastics are an extreme threat and shouldn't be overlooked. Now, when we talk about bacteria, I'm sure that many of you are trying to think back now to when you were at school or in your GCSEs and thinking about when we were learning about different kinds of microbes. So bacteria are single-celled organisms, and they are absolutely crucial to human well-being, to environmental well-being, to life in general. Within humans, we have 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells. So human bodies are actually more bacteria than they are human. And not only are they important in humans, but also the environment. So if you were to go and take a litre of seawater and quantify how much bacteria is present, there can be up to 1 billion bacterial cells in just 1 litre of seawater. But don't sort of panic, because I know that, from coming out of the pandemic, we have this idea that all microbes are trying to kill us. This is not the case at all. So when we talk about microbes, we have commensals, which are completely harmless to humans, and pathogenic, which are these disease-causing organisms. And of course, the pathogenic bacteria, the ones that we need to worry about, the commensals are the ones that we need to harness for our own well-being and the well-being of the planet. And one bacterial species that I focus on with my research is E. coli. So E. coli is one of the most kind of widely documented bacterial species in the clinic. It's a causative agent of meningitis, bloodstream infections, urinary tract infections. But not only is E. coli important in the clinic, but also in the environment too. So one particularly hot topic at the moment is sewage pollution. I'm sure lots of you have been involved in campaigning against this. So one marker of sewage pollution is the presence of E. coli. This is an organism that exists in the human gut. So obviously, once you go to the loo, that organism goes into the wastewater treatment plant and then spills out into the environment. Now, when we think of E. coli, going back to the previous slide, we do have commensal E. coli, which are completely harmless to us and present in most healthy humans. But we also have pathogenic E. coli, and I call these pathotypes. So that's something that I'm going to come back to later in my presentation. But just keep in mind, when I say pathotype, it's a harmful E. coli. And then finally, antimicrobial resistance. So there are two things we need to think about here. We have microorganisms, so bacteria, viruses, fungi, and some parasites, and we have antimicrobials. So these are the drugs that we can use to treat infections caused by microorganisms. So for example, a bacterial infection can be treated with an antibacterial or antibiotic. A virus can be treated with antivirals, and so on. Now, microorganisms have the ability to evolve resistance to these antimicrobials. So bacteria, for example, when they're exposed to an antibiotic, they may evolve the ability to survive and persist in the presence of this antibiotic. And this is one of the greatest threats to human health at present. It's estimated that 5 million deaths per year are attributable to bacterial antimicrobial resistant infections. So we have these massive threats that this PhD is addressing. We have antimicrobial resistance and we have microplastic pollution. And I'm really interested in how these interact together, how the synergy or the antagonism between these two threats can actually exaggerate the impacts on human and environmental health. So how do they actually interact with each other? I think because they almost seem so siloed, we have a very clinical threat and we have a very environmental threat. How could they interact with one another? Well, the first thing we have to think about is how come these two things can exist in the environment together? How do microplastics and antimicrobials and resistant pathogens get into the environment in the first place? So if we look at the sources of microplastics, they're incredibly varied. So we have land-based sources, we have rivers being one of the most predominant sources of microplastics into surface waters. Wastewater treatment plants are one of the primary sources of microplastics entering aquatic systems, and then at-sea sources. And what's really important for my research is that when you look at the sources of antibiotics, they massively overlap with the sources of microplastics, meaning that in many situations, we have microplastics, antibiotic residues, potential human or animal pathogens, and drug-resistant organisms or genes coexisting in the same environment. So when microplastics go into the environment, they're very rapidly colonized by diverse microbial biofilms. They have bacteria, viruses, fungi, all starting to attach onto the microplastic surface. And this has been called the plastosphere, which I'm absolutely obsessed with. I'm so glad my area of research has a really cool name. I'm waiting for there to be like a Star Wars in the plastosphere or something like that. And this is the idea of the microbial reef. Imagine a coral reef, how dense and diverse and all of the biodiversity and the activity taking place. Imagine if you like shrink it down, think of Horton Hears a Who, and imagine it on a microplastic with bacteria. That's what we kind of have. So not only are these communities found to be distinct from the surrounding water or the surrounding sediment, but there's also evidence to suggest that the communities attached to microplastics are distinct to the communities that are found on natural debris, so wood, for example. Not only that, but there's a concern that microplastic-associated microbial communities are hotspots for antimicrobial resistant organisms and potential human or animal pathogens. So if I haven't explained that well enough, I know that I can kind of go off on tangents here and there because, it's what I spend every single day talking about. I have something which is a bit of a cliche, very, very cringe, quite difficult to watch, to just really bring it all together and explain it to you. This is a clip that I've stolen from the BBC. It's from Doctor Who, and it can be quite dramatic, but I think it really kind of makes the point that I'm trying to get across. So hopefully you can hear me okay. If I can just hear this okay, if I can just get a thumbs up that the sound's coming through, that would be great.
The antibiotics aren't working. He's getting worse.
Doc, Haramu said that the birds are getting really angry out there.
Not surprised if this is what their insides are like. Take a look. They're full of plastic.
Once plastic gets in the ocean, birds mistake it for food. I've seen hatchlings regurgitate 200 individual pieces.
It's feasting on the plastic in the birds and taking them over. The alien pathogens attacked the plastic. The plastic metastasized as if it was living. Autons? No, it can't be autons. They don't work like this. Not bacterial. Come on, brains, move it along.
She said brains, plural.
But how does that explain what happened to Jamila? Like, she just got taken over?
Yeah, how does it? It attacks the plastic in the birds, but there's no plastic in humans. Except... oh, microfiltration.
Hey, Doc, that's not a thought. That's just a random phrase.
No, that's a very big thought. The microfiltration system in the water. It filters out microplastics. Alien bacteria homing in on microplastics because humans are full of them.
Excuse me, I'm not full of plastic.
Full of something.
I'm afraid you are, Graham. It's in the air, it's in your food, it's in your water. Humans have flooded this planet with plastics that can't be fully broken down. So much so that you're ingesting microparticles whether you know it or not. You're poisoning yourselves as well as your planet. An alien bacteria has come to this planet and it found a feast.
So you can imagine my reaction as I'm sat on my sofa in my living room with my family, eating a Chinese takeaway probably, watching this, and I'm like, I promise you I did not get my PhD research idea from Doctor Who, but this is essentially the kind of the kind of backbone of my research. It's not looking at alien bacteria, but it is looking at how bacteria in the environment are attaching to plastics. And then what is that role of the plastic then? Is it then a vector for these potentially disease-causing or antimicrobial resistant bacteria into animals and then potentially into the food chain? So there are three areas that we hope to research with my PhD. The first is looking at selective colonization. So are microplastics over other materials, so wood and glass or remaining free living, chosen by disease-causing or drug-resistant bacteria? And then the other two are looking at, okay, if we do see disease-causing or drug-resistant bacteria on microplastics over other materials, what is the role of the microplastic in causing the evolution of further antimicrobial resistance? And then what is the wider impact of that? Do microplastics, because they're persistent, carry those bacteria into new environments, into the food chain, for example? So I'm just going to briefly show you some of our findings so far, but I won't really cover a lot of the methods in detail because it's quite boring. It's just a lot of lab stuff. But essentially, the first study that we've done is looking at this selective colonization. So to do this, we have 5 different particle types. So we have nurdles. If you've done beach cleans, you've likely seen these. These are sourced from the plastic industry. We have biobeads. These are from the sewage plants, polystyrene, wood, and glass. With these particles, we ensure they're sterile. They've also been environmentally aged, so they were sourced from the environment. And then we basically put them in a load of sewage and see what attaches. So we grow the biofilms and then extract the biofilms and see what's grown where. So what's on the screen now, this is a box plot. Along the bottom here, you have our different communities. So our different particles, biobeads, glass, liquid phase, that's the bacteria that remains free living, nurdles, polystyrene, and wood. And basically where you see these boxes higher than the other boxes, that's where you see a greater amount of what we're measuring. So in this case, we're measuring an antimicrobial resistance gene. So this gives an indication of where you see drug resistance in our different communities. This resistance gene is called INTI1, which probably means nothing to you. It's basically used as an environmental anthropogenic pollution marker. But what I want to highlight is that from this plot, we can see that in our polystyrene and in our wood communities, we see a significantly greater INTI1 prevalence than our other communities. And the general kind of outcome from this is that we can say that surfaces promote the attachment of antimicrobial resistant organisms, but essentially the surface matters when selecting for AMR. So we are seeing a selective colonization. The drug resistant organisms are choosing the polystyrene and wood over the other materials. Now this plot, exactly the same thing, but instead of looking at drug resistance, we're looking at pathogens, going back to that pathotype thing that I was explaining earlier. Same again, we've got our communities along the bottom, and the box that's higher than the rest of them, so the greatest proportion of pathogens are seen in our biobead biofilms. So what's really key to note here is, of course, these biobeads come from sewage. They commonly exist with E. coli because that's also E. coli is also sourced from sewage. They're commonly existing with antimicrobial pollutants. So if we do see the disease-causing bugs choosing biobeads over the other materials, then we really need to use this information to inform waste management practices and also wastewater treatment plant processes. So again, from this, we can conclude, or at least suggest, that surfaces do promote the attachment of pathotypes. And again, the type of surface matters when selecting for these pathotypes. So my original question was, do microplastics promote the attachment of AMR pathogens? Well, we've seen that surfaces do promote the attachment of AMR pathogens. Now we want to know, is it the particle or the community that's there that's selecting for these communities? So the next things that we're going to look at very briefly, as I said, is looking at the evolution of antimicrobial resistance. And there are lots of different theories of why this may be taking place that are dependent on the microplastic. So you have bugs that are living very closely together, they can pass information to one another, but microplastics also are hotspots for antibiotics. They absorb to the microplastic, so we have an increased selection pressure for drug resistance. And also within microplastics, there are additives, antimicrobial additives that are put into the microplastic matrix, which could also be driving the evolution of drug resistance. And then finally, as I said, we want to look at whether microplastics are vectors for these associated communities. So one experiment that we've just been doing, and actually later today I need to go and collect some microplastics from the environment, is actually taking what we're finding in the lab and making it more environmentally relevant. So we're putting microplastics securely into the environment and leaving them for a prolonged period of time, taking them out and seeing what's grown where. So that's a real kind of whistle-stop tour of what I hope to achieve over my PhD period. Just to say thank you again to the organisers for the opportunity to present today, and of course to all of my supervisors, collaborators, funders, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Emily. That was a great talk. Just so if you've got any questions from the audience, could you just pop them in the chat box, and Helen will read them out for you, or if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask in person, just use the raise hand emoji so we can see you. So we've got one question already in the chat box, which I'll just quickly read out because it's probably easier. So Nigel Mortimer is asking whether we should insist that volunteers use gloves during beach cleans.
Yeah, so this was actually one of the biggest inspirations for actually doing my master's and my research. Obviously, with Beach Guardian, we do a lot of beach cleaning, and I wanted to know, am I putting myself at risk? Am I putting my volunteers at risk? We know that regardless of this PhD's findings, if microplastics are more risky than other materials, they do have very diverse communities present on them. They are rapidly colonized. It's not just microplastics, macroplastics as well are very densely colonized by microbes. So absolutely, we should be wearing gloves when touching these things and washing our hands afterwards.
Thanks, Emily. We've got a couple more questions in the chat. Sophie Foster has asked, do different kinds of plastics attract different kinds of microbes, like hard versus soft plastics, for example?
Yeah, so this is a super novel area of research. It's only just started being investigated, and it's very much at the discovery stage. There are lots of different researchers looking at what are the drivers for these different communities. So some people are looking at polymer type, so that's kind of the hard versus soft plastics. And some of that research is finding that polymer type does drive the community structure. Some is showing the opposite. So there are no clear conclusions yet, But there are also other things to consider. So it's not just the plastic color, type, etc., but also environmental conditions can also affect the community. So it depends where the plastics are as well. But there are things about plastics that do drive the communities. So the hydrostatic forces, the hydrophobic nature, some of the things that can be available to the microbes that are in the plastic and that kind of thing. So yes, there are influences, but there's no conclusion. There's no like, oh, hard plastics are worse, for example.
Great, thank you. And another one from Leah Costello, who's asked, thanks so much for a great presentation. I was wondering what size beads you were using, as they look quite large in the image that you showed.
Yeah, so the beads that I use are pretty much at about 4 millimeters. They're all less than 5 millimeters, but they are like the largest microplastics you can get. The reason that I wanted to use these is A, they're easier to work with, they're easier to get the bacteria off, but also they are the most relevant for kind of my background and my expertise of what is present on our beaches, and what could be potentially increasing human exposure to these associated communities. Later down the line in my PhD, and this is where the expertise at Plymouth Marine Labs is going to massively be, hugely valuable, is we want to kind of look at that role of microplastics as a vector in the food chain. So potentially expose mussels, filter feeding organisms to microplastics, and see if the associated bacteria or resistance elements can go into the gut microbiome of the mussels. My 4 millimeter microplastics are going to be useless for that, so we are going to need to use something much smaller. But yeah, for the moment we're using quite big pellets.
Oh, thank you very much, Emily. Just in the interest of time, we're just going to move on to the next presenter, if that is okay. I think there may have been a couple more questions for you in the chat, so if you maybe want to go in and answer them, that would be great, Emily. So our next speaker is Rachel Yates from Surfers Against Sewage, talking about plastic-free communities. So yeah, Rachel, please share your screen. Yeah, it's there.
There you go. Right. Thanks very much. So yeah, so I head up the Plastic Free Communities movement for Surfers Against Sewage. And just to give you a very brief potted history, Plastic Free Communities came about 5 years ago. It was a campaign developed by Surfers Against Sewage as we saw this new pollution crisis of plastic arrive on our shores. You know, the clue as to what we do is in our name. We were a bunch of surfers who set up a campaign group because we were sick of getting sick from the water, from poor water quality. But as I say, over time, as we were working on sewage pollution, we saw plastic pollution arriving on our shores in increasing numbers. So our beach clean programme really massively turned up. And what we also recognised through that is the more and more people we were getting out on the beaches and cleaning up, the more and more plastic we were taking off the beaches, the more we realised that, you know, we're never going to beach clean our way out of this problem. So that's how Plastic Free Communities came about. And we wanted to start looking at upstream solutions as how do we stop plastic getting there in the first place. So first off, I'm just going to play you the Wasteland video. We launched the campaign with Wasteland, and I think this video kind of sums up really what we wanted to create and what our aims were. So I'm hoping it's going to play for you.
We live in a dangerous time. A new superpower is rising in the Pacific. A country 5 times larger than North Korea is amassing the greatest chemical threat ever known. Yet its aggressive expansion is being ignored. Governments refuse sanctions. and leading corporations continue to profit from it. The battle for the Pacific has already been lost. But this is just the start. Expanding its borders with the plastics we throw away, it threatens the entire planet. This is wasteland.
That was the original campaign video for our plastic-free coastlines, as it was called then, for that campaign. Through that, we was obviously talking about the Pacific Gyre that Emily was talking about there, because that was in the news a lot at the moment, and relating that to our actions here in the UK, and we're all contributing to this global crisis. So it was launched as Plastic-Free Coastlines. The aim was to have 125 communities working on it by the end of 2020. Within 6 months, we were on around about 200 communities, and we realised that the campaign wasn't just reaching coastal communities, but communities across the whole of the UK were wanting to get involved. And what had happened was that the campaign launched, and then our first community, Penzance, got the award at the height of the Blue Planet effect. So the community actually announced its award the day after the episode that looked most at plastic pollution. So the country was becoming more and more aware of plastic pollution, didn't quite think, no, well, what can we do? And then suddenly there was this toolkit that people could do, and there was a community that was doing it, and interest in the campaign just exploded. So just to give you a sense of where we are now, we renamed as Plastic Free Communities to recognise the fact that our communities are all over the UK. They're not just coastal communities. And what's great about that is it's linking our inland communities with what is happening in the ocean, that our actions in inland communities do absolutely affect water quality, whether it be sewage pollution or plastic pollution. So these stats taken from our impact report, we've got a little bit of an update on them now. So at the time we had 831 communities. We've now got 900 communities across the UK working on the 5-step toolkit. Of those, 170 are now awarded with a plastic-free community status and are now deepening the actions. In a moment, we'll look at what that looks like. And at the time, with those 831 communities, it was an estimated 29.4 million people living in a plastic-free community. That's around 44% of the UK population. But you can see again from these stats, I'm not going to go through everyone, just how that breaks down as to the reach of the campaign. Over 16,500 volunteers are estimated to be part of it, giving an enormous amount of time. And we've broken down the types of councils who are involved as well, because system change is a really big part of what we want to do through the Plastic Free Communities campaign. So what is it our communities are looking at? Well, they're looking at what we call the offenders, the main offenders. There's 10 items. It's single-use plastic, so that's the first thing to say. Our plastic-free communities are not completely free of plastic. They're not completely free of single-use plastic. What they're doing is putting in place a 5-step toolkit to start tackling the problem at source and to lay the foundations for continuing and sustained plastic reduction where they live. So these are the items that they focus on, and you'll see on these stats at the bottom why we focus on these items. These are the items that we're turning up in our beach cleans in their droves. They're the items that we use in our communities and as individuals in their millions every single day in the UK. So if we make a decision not to use these single-use plastic items, we're already making a massive difference. So things like plastic bottles, 38.5 million plastic bottles are bought every day in the UK. Only around half are recycled. So that means around half of those, 18 million, end up polluting the environment in one way or another. Now that could be through landfill, through incineration, or actually ending up directly in the environment. So an action just to decide not to use single-use plastic bottles itself can have a massive knock-on impact. Coffee cups and lids are the same, 7 million. I think the latest stats are nearer 8 million of those are used every day in the UK. Now, if we all make a decision not to use a single-use coffee cup, we are making a massive difference. So our communities focus on these 10 offenders, and there's stats attached to all of them, across individual action, business action, council actions, wider community groups, and also events and things like that. So how do they do that? They follow a 5-step toolkit. which breaks it all down for them. So the first thing, they can do these in any order, but one of the things that they will do is look at local governance, because at Surfers Against Sewage, what we are about is inspiring grassroots community action, but taking that voice to power and bringing about the system change that we need to see. So we enable our communities to do that on a national scale, which again we'll look at in a moment, but we get our communities to do that on a local scale as well. So what they'll do is they'll work with their local council in the initial toolkit to get the award, to get their council to support the local campaign and pass a resolution which commits to leading to example and removing single-use plastic items from their own premises and their operations. They're to encourage any plastic-free initiatives locally and to have a representative from the council on the local steering group to help build the campaign. And once they've got the award, take that on and deepen actions in the community. The next thing that they'll look at is community action and events. So this is in the initial toolkit to get the award, we ask them to hold 2 events across a calendar year, which are open to everybody in the community. Now that could be a community clean, a million mile clean on the beach, in street cleans, it could be a park clean, whatever that looks like for that community. They could hold a mass unwrap, which is our action at supermarkets to highlight the amount of plastic that supermarkets are giving out. But they could decide to run something that they want to build themselves as well. So that could be a film night, an exhibition, it could be community workshops, whatever they want to do. And that's to raise awareness in the community, to invite everybody in the community along and build that movement, but also to show the community how actually they can start very simply on this journey, but make a big impact from that initial start. They also work with what we call our business champions. So we have a business champion awards scheme with a bronze, silver and gold level. And to get the award, a community will have a target of businesses to work with based on their community size. And the initial step is to actually just get them to become a plastic-free champion on that first bronze level. So to be a plastic-free champion, a business will need to have removed at least 3 single-use plastic items from their business and have a plan in place to tackle the rest. They can retrofit it. So if a business opens up in the community, they're already doing this, brilliant. You can retrofit the award. You can also go straight for the gold award. So a gold plastic-free champion is a business that has done as much as it feels it possibly can around plastic, single-use plastic, at the level of influence that it's got, and it is pushing up the chain to suppliers and to system change, to industry and to government as well. So again, they'll have a target depending on what their population size is. And our plastic-free business champions are where the visibility of the campaign really starts to go through. The businesses are a really important part of making a plastic-free lifestyles possible, of again giving that feel to a plastic-free community, that when you go to a plastic-free community, there are businesses that you could go to who you know are on this journey. They may not be completely single-use plastic-free themselves, but they are on the journey and they are tackling this and they're part of the solution, and you can support them and support your own plastic-free lifestyle through them. They also work with community allies. So community allies are plastic-free schools. They will sign schools up to our plastic-free schools programme, which again is a 5-step toolkit for a school to become plastic-free. And that's great because it actually really empowers the pupils to lead this and teaches them those really early campaigning skills on actually, if you don't think something is right, you can actually use your voice to say something. So they will write to their local MP. They'll get in contact with Coca-Cola, with Walkers, with all of our top offenders in terms of brands, to show them what they found in their trash mobs, their cleanups around their schools, and where these companies' packaging and their branding is ending up. So it's a great pupil-led scheme. So signing up plastic-free schools and working them is what will happen in a plastic-free community. But they'll also work with other environmental organisations, local beach clean groups, local community clean groups, other wider environmental organisations who are working on the bigger picture, not just plastic pollution. They'll also link up with local events, local festivals, groups like the local Brownies, the WI, sports centres, libraries, anything, anybody, any organisation or site or venue in their community that is working with the community and can help that plastic-free message get out to a wider section of the community. So this is where a lot of our diversity and inclusion work will happen, with working with different groups and making sure everyone benefits from this plastic-free message but can be part of it as well. I think you've got a little message from a school where I am in Penzance here. So this is Alverton School. That's the, you can see power to the pupils is kind of the catchphrase almost of plastic free schools, and goes back to what I was saying before. The kids are really leading this. You know, I'll walk down the street in Penzance where I live, and a parent will come up to me and say, oh, I'm not allowed to put fruit shoots in the lunchbox anymore because, you know, someone's been in and done plastic free schools. And it's like, great, that's how it works. You know, we need everybody in our community talking about this and asking for those small changes. So one of the final things that a community group will do is set up, well, they'll be doing it throughout, but this is the final step that needs kind of ticking off almost to get the award, is that they set up a steering group. So this is the group that will take the campaign forward into the next stage once the award has been got. And we encourage people to have on that the kind of influences in their community that can actually make change happen, because as many of you on this call will know and recognise, as a volunteer, sometimes you can only get to a certain point. You need that help to push through, whether it be a council representative, whether it be someone from the local business group or the tourism group, whatever it might be. So our volunteers will set up a steering group to put in the award and to take that campaign on and to help make more community-based actions and solutions happen once they've got the award. But to get the initial award, that's kind of what they do. Those are the 5 steps that they work on, and running through all of that will be a campaign around individuals and families and households in the community around the actions that we can all take as individuals to support this. And all of those moving parts work together to support each other. So you're starting to build this movement on single-use plastic pollution. So these are some of our awarded communities in the Southwest. They've all completed that toolkit and are going on to deepen their actions. But what does that actually look like? So once the community has got the award, we really start to connect the dots to the bigger picture. So our communities themselves will go on to deepen work within those 5 objectives. So one of the aspects of the Plastic Free Communities resolution with the councils is that the councils pledge to support local plastic free initiatives. So in the coming years, we ask our communities to show us, how has your council supported you? Not from a, what are you doing? But it's that motion is there so the communities can use it to go back to their councils and say, look, actually, you said you'd support plastic free initiatives. We'd really like help with this, or we're trying to get a refill project off the ground, or we'd like to support our plastic free business champions. We'd like to roll out plastic free schools to every single school in the area. How can you help us? So it gives our community something to go to the councils with to ask for their support, and also the council a bit of a framework on this is how we are going to take this forward ourselves. Within the businesses, they'll work with more business champions and take them on that deeper journey to become gold plastic free champions. And as a gold champion, as I said, they'll be supporting system change and wider actions, as well as doing everything that they can locally as a business. They'll sign up more allies, they'll do more events and actions. They'll, you know, their steering group will really come into its own with identifying what are the local projects that we can work on. And then we harness that community movement and take it to power. So this kind of little how we work diagram shows that. We've got this powerful community movement working on a local scale. We then use that voice to influence politicians, to influence the brands, and to influence wider consumers and consumerism. So they do that through our Surfers Against Sewage campaigns. And this will be looked at through our Million Mile Clean. So a lot of the events and actions our communities will take part in is the Million Mile Clean, which is our beach and community clean programme. Through that, they will collect evidence, which is released every year in our brand audit, and that shows the top dirty dozen brands polluting our environment in the UK. We then use all that information to inform policy, our responses to policy consultations, to campaign in Parliament for policy change, to work with the brands around this and solutions, and to work with MPs on what that looks like. So right now we're working on our State of the Nation campaign, and our plastic pollution bill is making its way through Parliament, which will contribute to the Global Plastics Treaty. So it's showing our communities how these actions that you think aren't doing much on the global scale in your community, we show them that step-by-step programme, and we use that work to influence national and global change. They'll also get specific projects off the ground. So that's just a couple of examples of what they do around our plastic pollution campaigns for Surfers Against Sewage. But they'll look at specific projects locally as well once they've got involved. They'll have identified through that initial award, actually, we really want to get a refill scheme off the ground. So they might decide to focus on that in the next couple of years or the next year. They might want to do more around repair cafes or bringing a community composter. They might want to focus on getting more business champions on board who are deepening actions and do business workshops. Whatever that looks like for that local community will be different. And through the second part of the campaign, they've got all the freedom they need to explore that and to make things happen. A lot of our communities join the dots to the climate crisis. Plastic pollution is inextricably linked to the climate emergency. So they will want to do more about that wider picture and will want to join the dots between engaging people on plastic pollution and showing them how they can engage with wider environmental issues. As I've said, a lot of our community allies work is around diversity. So once they've got the award, some of our communities really want to focus on reaching different parts of their community and engaging with them so they can get the benefit of the campaign as well. And our communities take part in vital research. So one of our big research projects was with Plymouth University during lockdown, where we used the marine debris tracker with National Geographic to track plastic pollution during COVID. And hopefully the paper on that will be coming out this year. It's found some really interesting things around plastic pollution, and our communities were the research cohort who went out and gathered all of that research. So there's lots of different research projects that they can contribute to as well. And then we have our regional hubs that our communities, as more and more come on board and get the award, they can lead regional hubs, which leads to our plastic-free counties, districts and cities, which are bigger areas, joining up all of those smaller communities to create bigger communities, which have a bigger national voice. And this is what it's all about. It's creating, as I said, that national voice right down from your individual action up to national and global change. So we had some research done at the end of 2021 after the first 3 years of the campaign to see what was coming up. And I just thought it'd be interesting to share some of the challenges, because we could probably all relate to some of these that our communities and individuals and businesses that responded to the survey found. And again, I'm not going to go through everyone. I mean, I think these presentations will be shared afterwards, so you'll get them then. But some of the obvious one: food packaging when shopping at supermarkets, milk and dairy-free milk and drinks bottles. Cartons. Dairy-free milk quite often will come in cartons and plastic. How do you find an alternative to that? Cleaning products, cling film, shop bought sandwiches, hot takeaway food containers, some of the things that people are finding difficult, that we are finding solutions for them in their communities to help them address those. What we also found through this was that awareness around environmental issues, not just plastic pollution, is rising through the campaign, and community cohesion, which, if we're going to tackle plastic pollution successfully, that's what we need. So people more aware of global environmental issues as a result, more aware of plastic pollution, a feeling of belonging in the neighbourhood, 80% of people feeling more connected to nature in their local environment, and 95% of people feeling really strongly that they belong to their neighbourhood compared to 65% of the population in general. That's all really good stuff for making change happen where you live. The economic impact was really interesting as well through businesses. Businesses were the biggest drivers of plastic pollution through not giving out so much of it. And 95% of people who responded to the survey that we did say they try and use local businesses wherever possible. And 90% prefer to use businesses they can see are taking action to become plastic free, which is a real motivator for our plastic free champions to do more and get on board with the campaign. And yeah, it's inspiring our communities, as I've said, to go to the wider environmental journey. So they're setting up new environmental groups. They're taking part in activism and campaigning at other events like Great Big Green Week, getting involved with our wider campaigns, getting involved with the COP campaigns and the Day of Action over COP. More linking up with other groups, which is only going to make local environmental groups work stronger, and working with their councils to develop and promote environmental policies, which is brilliant if we want these upstream solutions. So this is just I'm just going to play this little video to end. This is our Plastic Free Communities Manifesto, and it should sum up everything for you. stop sharing my screen there.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Rachel. That was a really great talk and really highlights all the important work you guys are doing within the community. I've seen there's a few questions coming in. The one I think that was in the start that came during your talk was from Tina. How can I share my Cornish water refill station? We will have 14 sited soon around Cornwall.
Yes, so Tina, I saw you come in on the call and I'm really pleased because we've got one in Penzance and we're hopefully going to be getting another one. So if you can send all the details through to us, we've on those regional hubs, we have a Slack network of all of our community leads, and we have so we can post that in the Cornwall hubs and make people aware that it's something there for them to get involved with. So if you send me the information, we can get that out. And if anybody's got any national information, that will go out nationally, but we can regionalize stuff as well to make sure it's hitting the right people.
Brilliant. I think I found another one here. Is there any progress on preventing plastic microfibers from washing machines?
So Imi, who's at Plymouth University, actually has been doing a lot of work around this through her research. Yeah, it's not something that we're looking at specifically through plastic-free communities, but I do know that Plymouth Uni are doing a lot of research on that, and it's something that we're keeping an eye on in terms of how we can give the right kind of guidance really to communities and individuals, because it's something we get asked quite a lot. And I know people use the guppy bags, but you know, how effective are those? Things are changing so fast all the time. It's really hard to keep up with the innovation, the different things. I know, you know, when we all started doing this, everyone was swapping to compostable plastics, and we all now know what a nightmare they are. And I think this is going to happen a lot as we go through this process. So yeah, I leave that one to the scientists. So Imi Napper at Plymouth Uni is the one to contact about that one.
Cool, but I've just seen Tina's put her hand up. Tina, would you like to?
Yes, I went to a presentation yesterday and there was a company called Clean Seas from Bude. They've made a washing machine filter. It's about 30 centimetres by 30 centimetres, but you could Google that and they are for sale. So that's Clean Seas from Bude company. Looked great.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you for that. So, has anyone else got any more questions or queries? Have I missed anybody? If not, thank you ever so much, Rachel. That was a really great talk.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Okay, so next up we have the formidable Thusea MBE. Take it away, Sue.
Oh, hang on a sec. I need to share my screen. There we go. I was just about to start without sharing my screen again. Okay, can you see that? Hopefully it'll load in a second.
Yeah, there we go. Got it. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, so just to say hello, I've got a lot to get through because we've done a lot of years of research on impacts of plastics. So I'm going to whiz, you won't be able to read it all, but I want to give you a flavour so you can come back and ask questions if you're interested. If you want to get in touch with us, the best email is seals@cornwallsealgroup.co.uk. We started in 2000 and we're still going in 2023, which is great, and down to people who fund us. So thanks very much to our funders. Our philosophy is very much about sharing our seas and making sure that we can all enjoy doing what we do, but with minimal impact. And in order to achieve that, we work with a variety of partners. There are lots of different partners. I am not going to go through them all, but this is the Southwest team. And wow, we are very lucky to have an amazing network of local groups in the Southwest doing a joined up thing. The research that I'm going to present is down to these people who are our main assets. They are our volunteers, and we have hundreds of them. And, you know, like your other organisations, they're all doing amazing things. Our teams go from South Wales round to Dorset, and each one of these is a seal photo ID catalogue for an individual seal. So just to give you a quick flavour of how much data we collect, in 2021, I know it's a bit outdated now, but I haven't had a chance to do the 2022 report yet. We did 14 seal surveys a day. We processed nearly 250,000 photos for 13,000 seal identifications, 7 of which seals were first identified in the year 2000. Sadly, we had 134 unique entangled animals, and there was a lot of seal disturbance. 1,400 seals were disturbed in 282 incidents. I'm just going to put my camera off for a second, because Loz can then put a screen up behind me and then it won't distract you all. We talked to 13,000 people about this issue, along with lots of other issues. We've smashed that in 2022 and got over 26,000 beneficiaries, which is great. Why do we care? Well, because grey seals are one of the rarest seal species in the world. There are the same number of grey seals in the world as there are people in Cornwall. That always puts it into perspective for me. And they are protected in European and UK law. But we have over a third of the world's population in the UK, but there are still more of these little things, red squirrels, in the UK than there are grey seals. And they are fundamental to our coastal economies, because people come to see a dolphin and they go away happy because they've seen a seal. They are the most predictable and reliably sighted species around our coast, supporting our coastal economies. Okay, so life as a seal. Well, they live in the wild Atlantic Ocean. This is massive waves. You know, they're huge, these waves. You can see how tiny the seal is. But what always gobsmacks me is they have no control over their environment. And their environment is becoming less predictable, but they are driven by food and genes. And now I know that they're eating plastics. So now I know that this is a really big potential issue in terms of antimicrobial resistance, which is scary. Well done for alerting us to that. These are the sorts of threats that they have. Multiple threats: climate change, prey availability, pollution of all sorts, including plastics, habitat loss, persecution, bycatch, entanglement, and disturbance. So there are a couple of things on that list that are to do with plastics. Okay, I can just undo my video again. Here we go, look. So the data at the top on the graph is basically the Cornwall Wildlife Trust Marine Strandings Network data. We're getting more and more dead seals, including this one, who is called Wide Eyes Wolf, who died at the age of 6. Why are they dying? Why are we getting so many? Well, bycatch is one issue that we have. And if you want to learn more about this, we can provide lots of resources for you. We have loads of free resources we can share. But this was a seal that was bycaught in Longrock, recorded by Mick Dawson in 2018, a juvenile molted pup, so very young, hideous wounds, and obviously died very prematurely. But we know from fishers in Cornwall that 6 dead seals were found in a single monofilament net inshore sustainable fishery, and that one big, huge trawl net offshore had 38 dead seals in it. So this is a really big issue. DEFRA data in 2015 alone suggested that there were 310 dead bycaught seals around the southwest. However, by 2015, this is a report by the Sea Mammal Research Unit in 2016, this is the number of dead bycaught seals around the UK, so up to 580. So you can immediately see from the figure I just gave you that we've got a lot of seals dead in the southwest. So I was shocked by 2020 when I read in the Sea Mammal Research Unit Special Committee on Seals report that of the 474 dead animals found in 2018 that were thought to be bycaught, apologies, they weren't found dead, they were modelled as estimated to be dead. This was almost exclusively gillnet fisheries, and 85% were in our patch around the southwest. So that was a bit shocking. So we represent our data with the National Statutory Agency for Reducing Bycatch, the Clean Catch UK. And if you've never seen their website, their mitigation hub has a load of papers about how to reduce bycatch, and it's brilliant. On to entanglement, which is actually a form of bycatch, but it's live entanglement. Our research shows that we have the second highest rate of entanglement for any phosid seal species anywhere in the world, probably because we get the Gulf Stream bringing lost fishing gear from America as well as from our intense inshore fishery. Seals use it as a toy, particularly juveniles like this one called Lucky Star, and they play with stuff they find in the sea, but unfortunately their panic response is to spin, and when they spin they wrap themselves up in it, making it a whole lot worse. Or they swim through it like this seal did. So apologise for the gory photo, you can just shut your eyes for a second if you don't like it. But this is a seal called Antlers. This was him before he was entangled. And he was fit and well on the 4th of April in 2013. We first saw him entangled on the 13th of May. However, less than 4 months later, he was seen pretty decomposing and floating in the water. As a result, we're pretty sure of the entanglement in that lost fishing gear. That was quite a swift death, and we postulated that that was because multi-filament net like trawl net has more bacteria within it than monofilament net, which is much harder to colonize. But actually, maybe there'll be other opinions about this now. I'm sure Emily will have a view. This was another seal that we found dead. Cornwall Wildlife Trust Marine Strandings Network found dead, and I'm just going to hold it up. This is the net, so tiny bit of net that was found around his neck, and he died between 3 to 4 months, but up to 2 years. We couldn't narrow the window down from the sightings any further, but basically it's leading to a lot of premature death. So we published a paper, if you want to have a look at it, on entanglement in 2012, and we found that entanglement rates were 3.1 to 5%, and that 8.7% of all the seals in our photo ID catalogue were entangled, suggesting we're over identifying them a little bit. 64% of the seals had severe injuries, and all but one were fisheries related, and 60% had trailing material. And unfortunately, there was reduced survivorship for the entangled seals. We'll come back to this idea of trailing material in the next report. So by 2014, we were convinced this was a really big issue, and we started to do lost fishing gear surveys around the coast. For 4 years, we did this with our volunteers, but I'm only presenting some results from 2016-17. This is the boat survey, the systematic transects we did, and this is a volume of an estimated volume of the amount of ghost gear. And basically you can see it was all the way along our transect, apart from here where we actually were offshore, so we weren't visiting this bit of coast. You know that plastic is everywhere. We itemised it according to type. So from the boat surveys, most of the stuff was benign buoys and floats. So they're relatively less risky for seals, whereas you can see the grey, which is the net monofilament, and the yellow, which is the net trawl, were a substantial proportion of the lost gear, along with rope. And then there was an other category that was quite large in 2016-17. So you can see that actually there was quite a bit of consistency between the types across the years. However, we also did land-based surveys, and what we discovered, not surprisingly, is that lost fishing gear is all the way around the coast. And when we looked at the types, there was a slight difference in the land-based surveys, with more rope proportionally being found, but you can see that large amounts of trawl net, which is more visible, admittedly, was found, as well as monofilament net and other types of gear. You know all this stuff. You also potentially know that the type of gear varies around the coast, that certain things collect in certain places. So I won't dwell on that. Examples of monofilament gill net found all the way around the Cornish coast. Examples of trawl net, trawl net, and the orange is chafe gear, which is placed underneath the bottom of the trawl net to prevent it catching on the, acts like a mattress to protect the trawl net and prevent it from snagging on rocks, and then ropes and pot all the way around the coast. We also looked at entanglement around the coast, and you can see where we saw seals, but we also saw birds entangled, crabs, mussels, not something you routinely think of, and pink sea fans around the coast. So here's an example of mussels with lost fishing gear attached to them. Now the jury's out about whether this is a benign impact or whether it has a negative impact on the mussels themselves. It might actually have a positive effect in actually helping the mussels hold together more efficiently, but given the bacterial content of that net, probably not. Pink sea fans were found multiple times wrapped up in gear, but we're never sure about whether the pink sea fans were dead and then got amalgamated with the gear, or whether the gear actually rips up the pink sea fans and kills them. In this particular 1 year, there were 6 dead birds. There were 4 herring gulls, 1 gannet, 1 guillemot, and they were photographed at 5 different places. So to look a little bit at birds then. So this was a shag that we rescued from a gill net that was lost just outside Newquay. It was a pretty hideous entanglement. We watched the shag being thrown up by the wave and then plunged underneath the wave and then thrown above it and how the shag actually survived, I don't know. Presumably had not been there very long. But Bex Allen, who rescued it and cut it out from the net, took her 10 minutes to cut it from the net. That's how badly entangled the shag was. Shags are red listed as well, so we're really worried about that. Okay, I've got a little CD container here by my head. Actually, I'll put it underneath. You can see it's tiny, but in it is the gear that got taken from these estuarine herons. To cut a very long story short, the heron, and can you see it's also a chick, were taken for post-mortem. And what was very surprising is that the adult heron had a hook that had been swallowed and had gone all the way down its gullet and perforated its esophagus, which led to potentially a death. However, the chick had the orange chafe gear around it and was attached to the adult. However, the cause of death for the adult was a broken neck. And the only story we can come up with which would fit a potential cause of death like that would be that the chick had died because it was malnourished. However, it was attached to the adult with the chafe gear. The adult had swallowed the hook, but it didn't immediately kill it. The adult flew off from the nest in the tree. The chick was dangling, caught on a branch, broke the adult's neck, and then they both plummeted to the floor. So complicated circumstances, but plastics definitely implicit in that death. We also found, and here's the net from this one, much bigger amount of net. We assume that this unfortunate gannet dived into the net while it was trying to feed. Why it didn't see it, we don't know. But you could postulate that maybe it could eat. But the problem was that the gear had gone all the way down the esophagus and tracked really deeply into the gannet. The other really shocking thing is that this gannet had been shot in the head. And we assume that this was a kind fisher who had discovered the gannet struggling but alive and attempted to shoot it with an air rifle. Unfortunately, it just made matters much worse because air rifles are not powerful enough to get through a gannet skull, and it made more suffering. We still do ghost gear surveys, but not as systematically as previously. But I mentioned before that shags are red listed birds, and virtually every shag nest we see on a boat survey has lost fishing gear wrapped up in it. So we've participated with the Hebridean University to quantify that as well. We wrote a report for World Animal Protection in 2015, which included a lot of surveys over 13 years, and we discovered that rates of entanglement had been constant for a decade, although mostly they were adults who were in good body condition. So we had a sample of 262 entangled seals for this, and in 92 cases we could see the lost gear, mostly monofilament, and in 81 cases it was trailing. So I said I would come back to this. Of the 262 dead seals, not dead seals, apologies, of the 262 seals, 208 had a really severe restriction. You can see what a severe constriction looks like in these horrible photos below. But that the trailing material, the ones that had longer fibres that went towards their waist, really had a statistically significant impact on survivorship. So if you have a small amount of gear around your neck, well, you're going to not live as long, but you're going to live slightly longer than if it's trailing, because trailing creates nastier wounds because the seals haul over the top of it and it pulls away from the bottom, but it pulls in really badly around the back. And it was decided that this was likely to be a population level effect, and all but one of the items was fishery related. And what insights did we get from our photo ID work? Well, not only that a large number of entangled seals were caught up this way, but it can kill rapidly in less than 89 days. That flesh and skin, shockingly, this first photo is a post-mortem photo, but the flesh and the skin can heal up over the entangling plastic material. Wounds can deteriorate quickly, and movement alone, as in this particular case, this seal had no growing to do, but movement alone cut right through its skin. It was enough with the monofilament to act as cheese wire, and it's an important welfare issue although if they're released, they can heal up surprisingly quickly. Okay, so we've just produced this. I gave my first talk in Asia at the 7th International Marine Debris Conference for the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, and we presented our 2021 data. Well, looking back, the rates of entanglement vary between 2 and 4% of all the seals we identify, and we had a lot of records in 2021 alone. 357 surveys. In some surveys, we had over 10 entangled animals in one survey, maximum of 18 unique entangled animals any one single survey, and we had 134 unique different seals on our patch in that year. You can see that there was a bit of a step jump up in 2016-17 and another step jump up, which is a little bit worrying, in 2021. Okay, just to give you an indication of what this is like for the animal, I'm delighted to say that this lucky star was rescued. But unfortunately, in this particular first sighting, he was scared straight back into the sea by people on the cliff top. And it took British Divers Marine Life Rescue 4 months to be able to find him in a rescuable place again. And by that time, he had a hideous wound all the way around his neck. So that's the trawl net impact, and this is the monofilament impact. And you can see the impact of trailing material here. This animal is actually choking herself as she is trying to haul out of the water because it is pulling so tightly around her neck as she comes out. We don't need to put ourselves through the horror of watching the video, but again, this animal was very lucky because she was rescued by British Divers Marine Life Rescue before life-threatening impacts. Okay, whistle-stop tour of other plastic impacts on seals. This was a post-mortem animal. She'd had pups in 2 different years that we know of. She was called Appletree. She was beautiful, but she had a monofilament net in her stomach during post-mortem. This was a very interesting animal. When we identified her on the 20th of December, we estimated her age from the length, these ones are much smaller up here, to be approximately 2 to 3 years old. We saw her a few times over 3 years, and this was the day she was rescued by British Divers Marine Life Rescue in a legendary rescue at Senon. She was taken to their pup hospital and looked after extremely well, but sadly had to be euthanized as a result of the injury. And a paper has been written about this. I'm just going to go back a minute. At this rescue time, we thought she was likely to be 4.5 years old from our photo ID work. However, she went to post-mortem, and this is what the paper has been written about, and there were 2 key findings from the post-mortem. Firstly, that she was hugely stunted in her growth. She actually had the skull of a size of a 1-year-old, even though she was 4.5 years old. So entanglement stunts the seal growth considerably. But the second thing was that she had hepatic amyloidosis, which was the first case in a seal. And that was as a result, it's suspected, because of the entanglement that she has. Basically, those hideous chronic wounds cause inflammation, which cause toxins, which lead to organ failure, and in this case, the liver. So Legs, who is an entangled seal that is still alive and we're desperately trying to rescue, I've never forgiven myself for the first time I saw her in the top right photo. This is what she looked like 3 weeks later. So she'd done no growing, but the movement alone had sliced it right through her really strong skin. This is what she looked like in 2021, and lovely, but also hideous. In 2022, she had a pup with her hideous wound around her neck. She became entangled here. She is still suffering a welfare issue, but she did have a pup just before she became entangled, and then had another one in 2022. But like it or not, this is a really big welfare issue. We've got some emerging issues as well. So hooks are being seen much more regularly in seals, some of which have plastic attached to them. Apologies, I'm going back. These 3 seals were found hooked in Newquay Harbour in 2018. And then this particular individual, Trunk in Newquay Harbour, was hooked 4 different times in 1 year, and fortunately was rescued on each occasion. Our survey data of seals shows that we've got some long-term shifts. So our peak numbers of seals at West Cornwall has shifted shockingly from April all the way back to December, which is a big shift. So the peak numbers of seals have moved earlier in St Ives Bay, and unfortunately the mackerel fishery has moved later. So now we have a temporal and spatial overlap between maximum numbers of seals and mackerel fishery. And the unfortunate side effect of this, we've got 2 entangled seals, hideous round her neck on the right, and this lovely little pup. They're becoming entangled in the hooks, and the lines have to be cut. And as a result of this, this poor molted pup can't even move its rear flippers out, won't be able to swim and dive properly because of the multiplicity of hooks. British divers regularly rescue animals like this and have found animals with 22 different hooks. Another impact is flying rings. We've had a campaign on this. Anything you can do to help get posters put up would be great. All of those in the photo, bar 2, were removed from Carbis Bay Beach over a 2-year period. All of those flying rings, bar 2. And we have seen at least 3 seals in Cornwall caught up in flying rings. I'm warning you, there's a very graphic image coming up here. It's hideous. If you don't like it, please look away. But this is a seal on the east coast, and I think you can work out what the most likely cause of death of this adult female was. It's going to be her flying ring. Other plastic interactions, well, single-use plastics, you've mentioned it, you're working on it. It's great, SAS, that you're doing all this fantastic work. This is a photo that inspired Tina Robinson to produce her amazing charity and her water refill stations to help the problem of single-use plastics. This is a male called Rupert who is biting what I think might be a bleach bottle. Clearly not a great idea, but they get caught around their teeth and then they can be stuck there for ages. This is a plastic diesel container. Well, if it's got diesel in it, that's a very high risk, because if a seal inhales diesel, it will lead to slow organ failure, which is why spending time in harbours is really serious for seals. I'm not quite sure what this is, maybe a plastic lid, but this little pup is trying to suckle from its mother with the plastic in the way. Not sure what this is either, but I think it was caught around the adult male's teeth. It might be a crisp packet. Emily, I know you're legendary for crisp packets, so you'll probably be able to tell.
So we've got a bit of a lag on me, but we're
Okay.
still on the slide with the diesel drum.
Okay,
So
all right then. I will wait a minute then. Thank you ever so much. Much appreciated.
On the pup now.
It's working fine for me. I think it might be your internet, Sarah.
Oh, is it me? Okay, sorry.
No worries, that's fine. Thanks for letting me know. So this is, I don't know what kind of plastic packaging bag. I'm not quite sure what this is. 2 separate seals, different locations, one in Wales, one in Cornwall, playing around with plastic because it's great fun. But you can see that there's a good chance that it's going to swallow some of this, and they do get caught around their teeth and can stay there for quite a while. I don't know what this female thought as she got it wrapped over her eyes, but fortunately as she dives it will wash away. So this is our patch, this is our watch. Seals surrounded by our plastic rubbish is rubbish. Not good enough, is it? And this is obviously a pup that was brought up on the lizard amongst our detritus and plastic rubbish. This is why I am motivated. It's making me tingle saying it, because this is why I care so much about plastic and want us to help you do something about it. I want to finish on a good news story though, really. So this is Lucky Bunting. I saw her on a survey. We went out to rescue her. This is me wearing the head cam. We have to abseil in, cut her free. Basically, she had a growth spurt afterwards, because I mentioned that they get stunted growth when they're entangled. She had a first boyfriend, second boyfriend, third boyfriend. Who knew? Fourth boyfriend. She mated with the 5th boyfriend, but still faffed around with the 6th boyfriend before she gave up her interest in boys at all, because she's now pregnant. She commuted onshore and offshore. She even met a diver and had a male who was looking after her called Mushroom, who gave the diver very clear body language: get lost, this is my female. But females rule Seal Society, so she came up and she told him to get lost and explored the diver anyway. However, the following year she had her first pup, having been rescued, which is great. Second year she had another pup, and this is, oh, I haven't put the most recent one in. We have a 2022 pup, which is really great news. I am driven to work on plastics because I do not want all of these seals to have died in vain. This is a molted pup from last season. you know, what it's going to do with this little bit of gear that it's going to play with. Hopefully it'll be benign, but perhaps not. And, you know, this was at Hell's Mouth. Somebody chucked a wheelie bin over the top and the pup is lying next to it because it thinks it's its mum. This is really not good enough. So thank you to all your volunteers for all the massive amounts of cleanup operations that you do. We know what the solution is. It's multiple aspects, all of those things that you can read there, and we all need to work together in order to try and solve this problem. I have free Google Drive resources on entanglement, public resources and flying rings if you would like to help with that. My latest book has just been updated and republished. I've just made it a bit bumper edition, and we are funded, as I said, through our corporate sponsors and our funders who you saw on the first slide. Through our online shop, we've got lots of one-stop shop for Sealy stuff online, and also we have an adoption pack. I would love to get some feedback on this talk, so if you're able to share the QR code and the link for the talk, I need feedback. But I just want to finish by saying, I'm sorry I've gone a little bit over time, that for me, one of the biggest threats to our planet is to be blue blind, not think about the sea, to deny that there's an issue, can't be bothered and apathetic about it, and myths and misconceptions. Our biggest mistake will be to prioritise ourselves over nature. Nature sustains us, and without it, we have no food, drink or life. The planet doesn't need a plan B. We do. The planet's a lump of rock. It'll be there when we're long gone. The good news is that if we make space for nature, nature moves in, and when we help nature, nature helps us. But have we missed the point? I hear lots of people talking about saving the environment. It is not about saving the environment. It is about saving ourselves. And if we have young loved ones in our family, they need us to act for them so they have a chance of a good life on a livable planet. That's me finished. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sue. That was an amazing talk. Obviously, horrendous images, but nice to end on an inspiring note as well. We've got some questions coming through. Helen, did you want to take over the questions?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sue. So Ben has asked, regarding plastic in nests, what do you believe are the reasons for this?
Well, it's a very good question, and I honestly can't answer that, Ben. I'm really sorry. I don't know why they choose it. I guess it looks like floating debris, seaweed, natural materials floating on the surface. You know, one of the reasons why we think seals get caught up is they like playing with kelp, and maybe lost fishing gear looks like kelp, and they play with it in the same way. And maybe it just looks like a bit of natural material floating on the surface and they don't know it's plastic. I don't know what bird eyesight is like in terms of, it's a good question. Gosh, I love good questions. I don't know what eyesight is like in birds in terms of seeing colours either. So maybe it's a preferential sight thing that they can see it more easily than natural materials. I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. Another one from Leah Costello. She says, when rescuing, are you allowed to use any kind of tranquilizer gun to make sure that the seals are captured when sighted and subsequently unentangled and brought in for recovery, treatment or rehabilitation? She doesn't know the rules and was just wondering.
No, that's completely fine. It's a great question. I just want to say that actually we as the Seal Research Trust don't lead on rescues. It's British Divers Marine Life Rescue who are the legendary organisation for that. But basically you have to be able to get to the seal before the seal will get to the sea if you're to stand any chance of rescuing it. The Americans have been trialling sedatives, you know, dart guns, to have a fast-acting sedative. And unfortunately, they've discovered in America that it is harder with phosid seal species. They're much more likely to dive before the sedative acts and then they drown underwater. And you may have seen recently in the press that this was used for the first time in a really desperate situation in a lake in England. And everything else had been tried, but there were threats to kill the seal because it was in a fishery-based lake and it was eating the fish that belongs to the anglers. So they decided they tried sedation for the very first time, and unfortunately the seal died and disappeared, and most likely didn't. They asphyxiate underwater. They don't drown, they asphyxiate because they're voluntary breathers and they don't take a breath underwater. And unfortunately it's likely that best will in the world sedative actually killed the animal. But then it's better dying than in an inhumane way, I suspect, if somebody had tried to kill it.
Yeah, very sad. Tina has said that her local spa sells those flying rings, and she intends to show them some of your photos and have a gentle discussion.
Okay, well, can I just respond to that and say, Tina,
yeah.
please let me send you the letter. We've got letters for vets, letters for dog grooming parlours, letters for supermarkets, letters for lots of small retailers. If I send you the letter, then you can take a letter with the poster and ask them to put it up. We have a legendary volunteer called Peter Perkins who put them up in every supermarket that he could visit in Cornwall. And he has also been around every vet practice, all 50 of them in Cornwall. He hasn't done the Plymouth ones. So, you know, challenge on for you guys, vet practices, to take the vet letter and the vet poster and ask them to put them up. And as soon as the vet practices see those images, they want to help, because people just don't realise that this toy is a risk.
Great, thank you. Liam Dixon, has asked, what are some of the most common non-fisheries related sources of entanglement?
Oh goodness, that's interesting, isn't it? I've seen seals with bandanas, like, you know, cloth bandanas, shopping bags. But I don't actually think I could quantify, because so much of the material is actually fisheries related that you don't really get major amounts of other stuff. It's oddities, which is why it sticks in your mind, really. It's a bit strange. So I'm not sure I've adequately answered that question for you, but I'd like to know. I mean, I'm worried about microplastics because they'll be filtered out in the fish that they eat. The fish have got it. They'll be eating it, and I fear that the microplastics will be stuck in the guts of the seals, which is what's been shown by the research that's been done by you guys. And as a result of that, and what proportion of the seal stomach has to be blocked before it can't effectively digest its food because the absorption's been messed up. And the same is true for us, I'm sure, but yeah.
Great. I'll just do 2 more questions and then I think we'll wrap up. So sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. Pine. How can you be sure that the entanglement happened in ghost gear rather than during active fishing operations?
That's a very good question, and we can't be 100% sure. It's just that in most cases, the net that we've removed, it doesn't look like it's been cut. But the other thing about live operational gear catching seals is that if a seal is to survive that, it has to get to the surface to breathe. It has to be cut out before it asphyxiates, basically. So that's about a 20-minute window. So if it's caught in a live operational net as bycatch, then it has to get to the surface. The fisher has to visit the net, realise it's happened and cut it free within 20 minutes. So our supposition is that the majority of bycatch is in live operational gear that kills animals, and that the most of the live entanglement is actually in lost gear. But we have no evidence to back that up scientifically.
Thanks, Sue. And we'll finish on a positive one. Sophie Foster has asked, how can we help or get involved?
Okay, that's great. So I don't know, ladies, are you willing to share our Google Drive links of access to our free resources? And then you can basically download, but the main way to get in touch, please, is to email seals@cornwallsealgroup.co.uk. We have free volunteer online training, and it's not to recruit you, it's to see if volunteering with us is something that is going to suit you, because you have to be happy helping out. So emailing us is the best start. You can start joining us at our monthly Seal Southwest sessions online, or you can do some volunteering training, or you can just help spread the word about flying rings. Lots of ways, thank you. We'd love to hear from you.
I've just popped your website link into the chat, so you can go visit your website.
Lovely, thank you. And I'll put that email address in too. Thank
Brilliant.
you. And thanks, ladies, for organising this. It's brilliant.
Well, thank you all, amazing speakers, Emily, Rachel and Sue. It's been a really amazing couple of hours, and I hope everyone's enjoyed hearing all about the different aspects of plastic pollution that we've covered. So thank you to our speakers, and also thank you to our audience for joining us. Bye.